Guys, welcome to another Ultimate Edge webinar series. We're back with Tom Howell. Tom is kind of a frequent visitor here, and he always brings good content, good information. Tom is an educator, if you know him, and he's also really creative. Hi, Tom. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, John.
Let me do a little introduction for Tom. I've known Tom for many years. What I like to tell people when I'm introducing Tom, when I get face to face with the person, is I've had different CPAs for my business for years. And my previous CPA that I had a number of years back, I wanted to grow the business. We had some real estate and stuff. So I went to them and asked them for the best tax strategies for growth and sheltering taxes and things of that nature. And they said, well, let me think about that. And we had that kind of conversation three times. And they told me about 1031s and stuff like that, which I already knew. And then I knew Tom well enough, but he wasn't doing my taxes at that time. That was a number of years ago. And I brought him breakfast and asked him the same question. And Tom pulled out his famous yellow pad that he carries with him all the time and started drawing rectangles and saying, now here's what you can do. And laid it out as a small business owner with their own real estate and all of that, some very good strategies for growth and for sheltering income taxes and growing it. So Tom's done my taxes ever since. And I thank you again, Tom, for that. You put us on a good trajectory there. So thanks a lot. Tom is actually an enrolled agent, not a CPA. That means that he's been trained by, is it the IRS, Tom, directly?
It's licensed by the Department of Treasury.
There you go. Licensed by the Department of Treasury. And he's a tax strategist. So those of you who want strategy with your taxes, Tom is your guy. With that, we're going to talk about the options in lease options today. And thanks, Tom, for being with us. Take it away.
Very good. Thank you. And don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to interrupt me as I go through it. So I want to talk about various types of lease options and what you can do with them. One of the things that I like to talk about is the mission that I have for what I'm doing is there to transform lives through affordable housing, to empower families and individuals to enjoy the American dream of home ownership. So,
fine mission.
Fine mission, yes. So, what are lease options? A lot of people have never heard of a lease option, or if they have, they think it applies to something like a car or something like that. So, in the real estate world, it's a transaction where the tenant buyer attains the right to purchase a property at a later date for a set price, and then leases that property every month until it's purchased. Pretty simple. I don't think there's too many questions that come up with that. There are multiple types of lease options that are out there. The first one is what I would call a traditional lease option. It's one most people have heard of if they've been involved in any kind of creative real estate for a while. We also have the lease purchase, where we can take control of a property by purchasing it with a lease option. And then we have the sandwich lease option, where we take the traditional one on the exit side and the lease purchase on the buy side, and we sandwich it together into a transaction with three people. And then the thing that I think is exciting right now are the lease option assignments. Much like wholesaling real estate, we get paid a fee to help bring a tenant buyer and a landlord together into a lease option. There are some components to each of the lease options, so we need to be clear on the three options that the four components that we have. The first one is what I call the strike price. This is the price that the tenant buyer is going to pay when they get ready to purchase the property. Usually it's calculated by taking today's value of the property and then adding some component of appreciation based on the length of the term. My example today would be a house that's worth $500,000 today. If we assume a 4% growth rate each year for 5 years, we would have a strike price at $608,326. I would probably take that down a little to $599, something like that. I want my tenant buyer in my circumstances, I want them to have a little bit of equity because I want them to buy the home. So I'm not trying to get them gone and do it again, which is the way some lease options were taught early on. I really want them to buy my house and move on. And I am a strong believer that you sell as often as you buy. So I think there's reasons to sell, and most people don't understand those. The second one component that we want to talk about is the lease option fee. This is what a tenant buyer would pay upfront in order to purchase that property, or to purchase the right to purchase the property in the future. Some people make it refundable. Some people make it non-refundable. Usually it's 1 to 5% of our strike price on our property. So in the $500,000 example today, if we said it was $600,000 in 5 years, we might ask them for somewhere between $12,000 and $30,000 for the option fee to go into that property. The next one is the monthly lease payment. Usually, because we're doing a form of seller financing, we can command a higher than normal rent. So a rent on a $500,000 house might be $2,600. However, if they purchase that property with $15,000 down, they'd have a $485 mortgage at 7%, 30 years, even with no PMI. Their payment would be $3,226 on that same house. So I would expect to charge somewhere between $2,900 and $3,200 rent instead of the $2,600 as a form of seller financing. Does that make sense?
Makes good sense. Absolutely. Tom, we're probably going to cover this on the option consideration and on the higher than portion of the normal rent. Does that go toward the purchase price of the house for the buyer?
That's the next slide. So that's what I call the lease rebate or credit. So this gets a little more complicated. It's often taught that you would give an amount of that lease payment back as a credit towards down payment or closing costs. So my example would be if we had a $3,000 a month lease, we might give $400 back for each monthly on-time payment. During the 4-year option, that would be a $19,200 credit towards closing costs. I believe that this is where all the litigation happens in lease options. So in the lease options that I have done so far, I don't give any money back for a lease rebate or credit. If you call it a down payment, that they're building up a down payment, and then something goes sideways, the judge could say that this is actually a sale, and you have a foreclosure, not an eviction, and it could cause other problems. So this is completely optional. Some gurus teach this as a key factor in their lease options. Some people don't do any of this, but this is where all the litigation happens, is how much of this credit is going to come back to them towards a down payment or a closing costs. And as a mortgage broker, I would ask you, how well do lenders look at that credit as a down payment?
That's a really good question. Dodd-Frank basically changed everything, including how tenants are treated on lease options and lease optioners and all of that. In the old world, we would give credit for that. Anything that made sense above the rent made sense to us. The option consideration made sense. I haven't seen one of those handled in a long time because things change so much. I would be concerned about that we would give credit. And I think it might depend on the lender, to be honest with you. And are you going to speak to Dodd-Frank considerations here, Tom, someplace?
I do a little bit. Dodd-Frank is the wide open question that I don't get a clear answer from any of the lease option people that I follow. It's my belief that Dodd-Frank applies to these transactions, even though Dodd-Frank does not specifically mention lease options. But it is a form of seller financing. You are extending an advantage on the home to a consumer. So you fall under all those consumer laws. So I would think, just to be safe and make sure we're in compliance with Dodd-Frank, is, as we've talked about, sending our tenant buyers through a review process with a licensed mortgage originator like you, who can do that sort of quick check and say, yes, if you do A, B, and C in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we would be able to get you a loan. And here's what you'd have to save up. Here's what you'd have to do to your credit. Here's what you'd have to do to your income. By having that feedback from an LMO, we have complied with every part of Dodd-Frank.
Yeah. Okay. So guys, if we were to get a client that is interested in purchasing a home and interested in considering a lease option, we would treat them like any other client. They would come through the normal process. We would gather credit with their authorization. We would verify the documentation we need to verify. We'd give them the feedback they need to have to show what they need to do to get successful to buy the house. And if it makes sense for them to enter that lease option, then of course the decision to do the lease option is upon them and the optioner. But what we're going to do is basically qualify them as best we can and give good feedback. So I think that's wise too, Tom. I really do.
Yeah, I think it's going to keep all of us out of trouble. So
Okay.
here's the problem. Most of our buyers have a credit or an income problem that keeps them from being able to purchase a home in a traditional way. And what I call it is the story. So we're looking for the story that says that they had a little bit of an issue and now they've recovered from it. So if they've had self-employment for only a year, they don't generally qualify for most traditional financing. If their credit or income dropped because of medical issues, divorce issues, bankruptcy, as long as we can see that their income is rock solid today, we don't really need to take a look at that credit score. If they do the right things, if they follow your advice, they would be able to get their credit score up in a matter of 2 or 3 years. Most people in 5 or 6 years could have no problem getting their credit score back up to a good solid range. So, and most people have a minimum down payment. The advantage of a lease option to the buyer is they're coming in to purchase a house with almost less cash than a 3.5% FHA mortgage. So they can come in with 20, 25, 30,000 on this $500,000 house, and an FHA, they're going to come in with 30 to 35 and probably pay more per month on the FHA payment than they would pay on the lease payment to us.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So it helps the tenant buyer, but it also benefits us in the long run. And we'll talk about some of that. Here's the advantages to the seller. The maintenance and repairs and the landscaping are all pushed to the tenant buyer. So that saves me my 5 or 10% of rent that I would have to pay for maintenance. Because of that, there's really no need for property management. They pay. My tenant buyers pay through electronic service that ACH pulls the rent out of their bank account on the first of every month. And I don't have any phone calls from anybody. I don't have any maintenance calls. So there's much less property management. I would bet that we get better tenants because they're screened by you and to a further extent by us, so that we know that they are quality buyers of this house. We also get a much bigger deposit than we would as a landlord. So a landlord usually gets somewhere between 50% to 100% of the first month's rent as a deposit. We're getting 4, 5, 6 times that amount as a deposit. And we always want to make sure that we write our option contracts as a separate document than our lease contract. So if we do have an eviction problem, we take the lease to the court and show it to the judge, but we don't have to show the option deposit, the option contract.
Tom, can I interject a question here and a comment?
Sure.
A comment is that also I've done a number of lease options guys in the past. And another reason why they're better tenants is you get people truly who do want to own a home. And most of the sellers say, look, if you're going to own the home, I want you to treat it like you're going to own it. You can do improvements that we agree upon and things of that nature. And you get that kind of mentality of the person who's the tenant. They're not really just a tenant mentality. They're going to own this home. So they treat it really, really well. It's been my experience with them. My question, Tom, is the larger deposit that is received, is there any concern about that you're getting too large of a deposit because it's a lease option? Would the court, if there was some situation for eviction or whatever, have a problem with that?
I have not found anywhere where that is mentioned. Some of the guru teachers out there have you get significant down payments, like between 5 and 10% of the purchase price of the property as an option deposit. So that to me is a lot of money to put at risk. So I follow the Burley model, which, as you learned, is a little bit of a smaller deposit, non-refundable, that doesn't credit towards anything, and no monthly credit, and then a much higher rent in line with what their payment might be. But there are teachers out there that'll teach you to do 5 and 10% down and give them make it refundable against the purchase price and then elevate the purchase price at the end to help cover some of that when they credit it back.
Yeah, and I think John Burley does not credit it back, Tom, because he wants to avoid any problems with Dodd-Frank. Am I correct on
Right.
that?
Right.
Okay.
So I would recommend that anybody that is doing this to, as a system business, that they run it through their attorney. Make sure they follow,
Absolutely.
the lawyer's advice, because every state, I know the coach that I'm with now, he's in Texas and he teaches Texas lease options, and Texas has its own set of forms and its own dynamics that are different than any other state.
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with Tom. If you take anything away from this presentation today, go to somebody and get good legal advice from a qualified attorney that understands real estate law so that you don't get yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in, guys. It makes sense. Tom, I have a question in the chat box. As a tenant buyer in Washington State, what are the websites that advertise houses offered as a lease option?
So, I have my own website that I changed servers and lost my old website, so I'm in the middle of creating a new one. But I have my own lease to own dreamhome.com website that I'm going to put my houses on. You can also market it through Facebook Marketplace. You could do it through Facebook groups in our local area. There's Craigslist. There's a website called Turbo Tenant that you can say is out there. There's another one called Zumper with a Z, Zumper. And then what works for me best is signs. I did the Facebook Marketplace and the Craigslist on one of my lease options in Marysville. I got a few calls, most of them from investors looking to give me $1,000 down and $1,000 a month on a lease option on my house, which was not going to work. As soon as I put the sign in the yard, I got 40 phone calls the next day. I think the sign in the yard, the directionals on the major arterials around the house, that's going to get you the biggest, baddest response to people. And it takes a while. You need 30, 40, 50 people to express interest before you find the one that is credit worthy with enough cash, with the aptitude that you want to put them in your house. So you're not in a rush to put the first one in the house. You want to find the right one. This is a real life example. This is my Marysville house. I bought this house for $500,000 in Marysville. The appraisal that came in at the time at $540,000. So I did not get a screaming discount. I got it a little under market, off market. The tenant buyer that I found came in with $12,000 non-refundable option fee, and they paid me the first month and deposit for a total of $16,500 on move-in. Their lease started at $3,000 a month, and my leases have a mandatory rent increase each year of 5%. And I gave them a 10-year option. So in year 5, they'd be paying me $3,600 a month rent, and in year 10, they'd be paying me $4,653. So every year, my cash flow gets better and better and better because my financing costs were fixed for 10 years. I gave them a strike price of $669 on a 10-year option. And I did that by taking 6 years at 4% a year to set the price. And what I tell my tenant buyer is the first half of the 10 years, the equity belongs to me. The second half belongs to them.
Okay, that's a
So,
good way to phrase that.
we're kind of splitting the difference. I give no credit again on those lease payments, and the tenant buyer is responsible for all repairs. So, and they're allowed to make changes to the house if they need to. They just can't break the roof line. So they can't put a dormer in, they can't add on to the house, but they're certainly free to remodel the kitchen, paint the rooms, put in new flooring, whatever they feel they'd want to do. I wanted them to feel like it's their home and that they're ready to buy the home when they're ready. And again, I like selling, so my big thing is getting them to buy.
Yeah, great attitude to come to with these guys. Teresa has a question, which I think you may have just answered with this slide, Tom, but I'm going to ask it and see if you want to add to that. Is the lease a multiple year lease to match the option contract timeframe?
So the lease is annually renewable, but it's a 12-month lease, annually renewable if they've paid all their payments on time. So
And on that annual renewable one, the rent goes up by 5% each time.
Rent goes up 5% each time. And I did run my lease and option through my attorney, who made very few changes to it. I mostly followed the Burley contract, and he made a few changes to it, and that was it. So I had no problem with the annually renewable lease and the 5% rent increase each year.
So those of you that don't know John Burley, Tom is a John Burley advocate. John is a guy down in Arizona that has done lease options for years. And I've been through his class. He's a very knowledgeable guy. And when Tom refers to the Burley model, you can pop online in YouTube and type in John Burley lease options, and you'll get all kinds of information from John. And if you want to go to one of his classes down there, he has them, I don't know, a couple times a year, I think, in Arizona, and you can go get taught by the man himself. Just to let you know who John is.
He's a very affordable teacher in terms of just getting the education. If you wanted to join his boot camp, you know, he's in line with everybody else on the pricey boot camp. But his raw information up front is pretty affordable.
Yeah, and he'll pour it out to you. He answers every question you want to think about. It's like a 3-day workshop thing you go down there for. Right. All right, Tom. Let's continue on.
So the next type of lease option that we want to talk about is the lease purchase. And this is a great strategy to acquire properties by way of control rather than ownership. It's great for those arbitrage strategies that we learned. So some people love the idea of an Airbnb, corporate rental, group home, or co-living, where you rent the house at one rate and then add cash flow by doing something with that house. So purchasing the house on a lease purchase and then doing an Airbnb lets you control the property without having to come up with the $150,000 down payment and so forth that you might have to do. It has the same 4 components as a traditional lease option. However, because we are trying to be the purchaser in this example, we want to slant the terms our direction. So I would want to adjust the strike price to the current value or to a modestly increased value. I would want to try and keep my monthly rental lease payments at regular rent. I want to come in with a low option fee and try to negotiate a large closing cost rebate back to me. I might also add into my contract a maintenance limit of $500 comes out of my pocket. Then the seller has to pay for the big things thereafter. And when we're purchasing on our side, we want to keep our lease and option as one document, so it's harder for them to go to a judge and kick us out of the house.
Oh, very good.
So when you read some of the courses from the students that do the lease purchases, this is how they're building their whole portfolio, is by purchasing lease options. So if you happen to have $100,000 available, you could buy 10 houses with $10,000 option deposits and control a lot more real estate than you would if you bought and sold over time, one at a time.
Very, very clever.
So there's the lease purchase. Once we understand the lease purchase side of things, we then go into what we call the sandwich lease option, where we buy a property with our terms on the lease purchase side. We sell it using the traditional lease option criteria. So we would get additional profit centers along the way, including the difference between the option fee. So we might collect 15 on the house, but pay the owner that we're renting from $5,000, and we would pocket $10,000. We would have a monthly lease payment differential. So we would charge our $3,200. We might be paying $2,500. We'd keep that $700 difference. And then the strike price at the end, here's where the big payday is. And then the rebate differential. So we give no rebate, but we collect a rebate from our tenant buyer. So here's an example of what some of those numbers look like on a transaction that you never really even own. So we find a seller who's willing to lease the home on a master lease with an option to buy. We agree to pay $40,000 more than the current value, but we want a 4-year option to do that with. And we agree to pay a $2,500 monthly rent. So this landlord is collecting the same rent they would collect as if it was a rental, but we're agreeing to pay $40,000 more when they sell it to us. And we get $250 monthly credit towards our closing costs.
Oh, okay.
You with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, so we now control a house. So we market this house out there, and we find a tenant buyer that agrees to buy the home for $599 in 48 months. They agree to pay us $12,500 non-refundable option fee and $3,000 a month rent with our 5% rent increase each year. And we give no credit for closing costs. So here's the difference between the investor, us, and the tenant buyer. The current value of the house is $500,000. We agree to pay $540 for that house, but we find a tenant buyer to give us the $599. So we would make $59,000 difference in our strike price. The option fee, we gave them $2,500 to go into the house. We collected $12,500, so we pocketed $10,000. Then the monthly lease payment, we pay $2,500 a month every month for 4 years, but we collect $3,000 a month the first year plus an increase each year. So you can see year 1, 2, 3, and 4 how much cash we're receiving for a total of $35,000 over the 4 years. We have a lease credit of $250 that we're collecting, but we're giving none. So we pocket that $6,000 as well. So for a property that we did not purchase, nor did we come out of pocket for any money, we made $110,000 over 4 years. That's a pretty nice ROI when you factor in the fact that you didn't put any money out.
Yeah, it's an infinite ROI, isn't it?
Right. So sir, there's some time and there's time and hassle in finding that tenant buyer, but for a little bit of that time and effort, you're getting a big return.
So I have to ask about the lease credit, Tom, that the investor is giving back to you. Is there concern there that there's a Dodd-Frank issue with them for that?
Well, we're an investor, so Dodd-Frank doesn't apply because
Oh, okay.
we're not a consumer,
Good point.
right?
Gotcha.
So I think we are in good standing when we rent that property as an investor.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense.
And then the fourth type of lease option, which I think is very applicable today in today's market, is the lease option assignment. So in this one, we find that seller who wants the maximum value for their home, maybe even more than the current fair market value. So one source for finding these people would be someone like the for sale by owner listings on Zillow. They're obviously not using an agent for some reason. They may owe more money on the house and they don't have enough wiggle room to pay the commissions, or they just may be adamant that they want top dollar for their house and no agent is willing to take that house as a listing because they know that the price is too high. We say, hey, you want $600 for a home that's only worth $550. We're happy to step in and help you do that, but it's going to take 3 years before you can get paid. But we can get you cash flow along the way. So we find that seller who wants that maximum value for the home. Once we secure that transaction, we then locate a tenant buyer who's well qualified to take that home on. And then we'll take all or part of that option fee that we negotiate with the tenant buyer as our fee, and we step away and we leave the tenant buyer with the seller in their long-term relationship as landlord and renter. The seller raises their price a little bit so they can cover the option fee that we took, and they'll credit it back at closing. So I have an example here I'll give you. The seller wants $600,000 for their home. We determine it's really only worth $560,000. You tell the seller you will provide the knowledge, paperwork, and tenant screening in exchange for the option fee that we negotiate with the tenant buyer. In this example, I put $14,000. We make the strike price now $614,000. So we went from $600,000 to $614,000 to cover the $14,000 that we got. The monthly lease payment is $3,200 a month. So the seller's going to net their $600,000 sales price and $3,200 a month until it's purchased. And we would have made $14,000 fee just for knowing how to put the two sides together.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes good sense.
Okay.
Just line up those potential buyers who want to do lease options, and there's a great strategy, isn't there?
There is. So here's some creative options with options. And I'll give you an example. I've used each of these on different transactions. So one is tax deferral elimination. You could lease option the house until the passing of the first spouse, and the heirs would receive all the gains. I actually made an offer to a gentleman in the Shoreline area. He had a house that was worth about $1 million that he had bought in the 1970s. So he probably had $900,000 of gain, never married. So his basis never adjusted. So he probably would have, he'd get his 250 tax free, but he'd end up with 600, 650 in gain. So he was looking at paying 90 to 100, 120,000 in taxes if he sold his house. He was in ill health and needed to move down to Oregon to be with family. So my offer to him was to lease the house on 5-year renewable lease option terms, and we would close within 1 year of his passing, and his daughter would receive all of the proceeds of the house. His priority was to pay this government no money. He was an anti-tax. No way in hell is this government going to get $1 of my money. That was his number one priority. So we could have bought the house, for 700,000 and at a discount and see if he would accept that. But he wanted no taxes. So we paid him fair market value, but we're going to pay that in the future after he passes away so that his daughter would receive all of his money. So it's a good tax deferral plan. If that's a priority for the seller, that is a good plan. Here's a sale leaseback transaction. We could purchase the home from the seller to unlock the equity and then lease option the home back. So I did this with a woman in Lake Stevens. She was in the middle of a custody battle with her ex-husband and needed funds out of her house to pay for the lawyer. She was a healthcare worker, and during COVID, she refused to get the vaccine. So she had lost her job. So she was struggling and knew that she wasn't going to be able to go get a HELOC or any other way to pull money out of that house. So her only choice was to sell and lease back. So I bought the home with her carrying back 20% on a second mortgage. I ended up putting 10% down, but then I negotiated a unsecured note for the down payment to come back to me. So I ended up owing her 20% on the loan and another 10% on the unsecured note. Then she was able to stay there, unlock her equity. She ended up with $150,000 cash. She was able to start the process with the attorney on the child custody battle. Unfortunately, a month after we closed, she came down with incurable cancer, terminal cancer. She lived in the house for 15 months before passing away. And just here, May 1st, I had the house re-rented to new tenant buyers who gave me another $15,000 to move into the house. So that sale leaseback transaction helped that homeowner unlock their equity and stay in the house. It was important for her to stay in the house because her teenage kids were going to the same high school, and she didn't want to change houses or addresses in the custody battle. So by leasing back, they were able to stay in the home for the period of time that they were fighting the ex-husband.
All right. So Tom, on that particular transaction, how does that intersect with the Washington state law that investors are so careful to avoid?
So she was not in foreclosure. So she had been making her payments, but she couldn't, because she was no longer working and living on her savings, she was unable to qualify for a HELOC.
Okay.
Because she had tried to get a HELOC and got turned down a couple times. So I don't believe she was a distressed homeowner.
Got it.
And again, I paid full price for this house, or almost full price. The house was worth $750 to $800, and I paid $700. Okay. But I did it with her producing 30% of the financing for me. So I didn't discount it to the point where I was taking her equity away.
Got it.
I do see a question that came up on the sandwich lease option.
Yeah. Let me read it to everybody. A bit confused. Sandwich lease. Does original seller know or care? Seems similar to subletting.
It is exactly subletting. So it's there's a lot of people that teach the arbitrage of renting a house and then putting it out on Airbnb. But instead of renting it, I would suggest that you get a lease purchase with an option to buy so that the future increase in the value of that home can belong to you rather than to the landlord. So we are subletting, and the original seller knows exactly what we're doing. We don't want to hide anything from them. But some sellers that have had, a string of tenants that haven't been, superb tenants, they might like the fact that here's a solid long-term tenant that's not going to give them any hiccups, that's not going to call them for maintenance, that's not going to deal with them with all the problems that they have. Then the third example, and this one you have to be really careful with. I would not want you to do this without consulting with the right people along the way. But I had a client who owned a house in Wenatchee, and he wanted to buy a new home that was under construction and keep his old home. But he didn't have any cash for the down payment, but he did have a lot of money in his IRA. So I told him that if he lends me money against one of my other houses, that I would then use that money to purchase a house and give him a lease option. So he lent me the money 3 months in advance of my purchasing the home, and then gave him a lease option to buy the house, rent the house and buy it back. And all he had to do, his rent is basically the payment, and I took a fee up front for putting it together.
So that is clever, and I would certainly agree with what Tom just said, that you want to make sure you talk to the right people to make sure you don't get in the wrong side of the IRS in doing so. Tom, can you comment on that? Yeah, I mean, you're the right person to have done that. I know that with your expertise. Is there any concern there?
Well, we had to move his IRA to a self-directed IRA so he could then, he had it at Schwab or somewhere like that, and he could not have done this deal from Schwab. So we moved it to a self-directed trustee. He then gave me a second mortgage on one of my other houses, and we did that right away. And then I sat on the money, and then later, when the house got finished with its construction, I entered into the purchase and sale agreement with the builder to buy the house. And I happen to have had all this money sitting in my savings account. So I qualified for the loan, put the down payment, and now I'm lease optioning it back to him.
Got it. Is there any particular amount of time you needed to sit on the money to feel comfortable doing that?
There isn't. And, the IRS has rules about self-dealing out of your IRA.
Yeah.
So I wanted enough time between the loan and the purchase so that it was not one transaction.
Okay.
And because it was a new construction home that he wanted far enough in advance of completion, we were able to do the loan for the IRA today, wait 90 days or longer to enter into the purchase and sale agreement to buy. So there was a good 3 or 4 months in there.
Okay. Very interesting.
So this is my information. So there's a sample of the sign that I put out in the yard that worked well. Again, my website went down and I'm in the process of building it up. So if you go there now, it is only half completed. But I do offer some consulting and coaching for people who want to do lease options or creative real estate deals. I also am creating a little email list where I can mail out opportunities, ideas, some education. I call it the RV Insiders. And if anyone wants to join my list, they just need to send me an email there, tom@reveststrategies.com, and I'll add you to my list and see if we can work together to make transactions happen.
Well, a very full of knowledge and creative presentation, Tom, no doubt. You delivered as you always do. I don't think I have any other questions, and I don't see any in the chat box. We've gone 45 minutes with this particular webinar, which is about right, guys. Are any other questions? Those of you on the webinar, feel free to put them in there. If I see anybody typing, I'll give us a couple minutes. Tom, thanks for your time. Thanks for the information. Guys, you can see Tom's contact information on the screen there. If you have any questions, give him a call. As always, if you have questions on loans, give me a call. This will be on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Definitely like this particular video. Comment on it. Forward it to everybody you know. Help us build our YouTube channel. We're here to help people create wealth with real estate. That's our mission in life. And we love putting owner occupants to properties. And this is a great way to do it with lease options.
Yeah,
Don't see any more questions.
This is one of the few ways to actually make things work with today's rates, right?
Yeah.
You can actually control your rate on the lease purchase and then sandwich it. And yeah, I don't know how you cash flow today at 7% rates. So we have to wait for those rates to soften a little to be buying more buy and holds.
Yep. Yep. Any other wrap-up comments, Tom?
That's it, unless there were any questions. It looks like one question's coming in.
What does the RV mean?
Oh, my company name is Revest Strategies. So I just shorten it to RV. So I have my Revest Insiders, I'll call it, but I just use RV. You could do the same thing, by the way, with RVs. You could lease purchase and then lease off and then do the rentals. You know, the vacation rental business in the RVs is highly lucrative.
I've heard a guy that does that, yeah.
Yeah, so.
The only thing limiting here, guys, is creativity, but I'm going to emphasize again, as Tom did at the beginning, make sure you do things in a careful and legal manner, so get good consultation from someone, a good attorney, a good real estate attorney, a good whichever kind of attorney you need to talk to make sure you're not getting on the wrong side of this stuff. Be careful. All right, Tom, thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it as always.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.